Listen, before we step into the story, I want you to try something simple with me. Place your hand on the nearest wall. Feel its stillness, its coldness, its absolute silence. Now imagine the same wall breathing, expanding ever so slightly, contracting, holding a heartbeat that was never supposed to be there. Because what happened in Bahia in 1861 is not the kind of tale you hear in museums or school textbooks. It existed in whispers, in the hollow space between prayer and fear. And it began with a wall inside a convent that wasn't as empty as it looked. Let me ask you something, and answer honestly in your own mind. Have you ever sensed that a place was hiding something? Not a person, not an object, but a truth so heavy it bent the air around it. That was the Convento de Santa Luzia, a colonial fortress perched above the Bahian coast, where the wind carried the scent of salt, candle smoke, and untold stories. Outsiders saw discipline, silence, obedience. But the nuns who lived there felt the weight of a different kind of silence, the kind that grows when people force themselves to ignore what's right in front of them. Bahia, 1861, a land where the Atlantic Ocean had been forced to swallow centuries of screams, where plantations fed European wealth with the lives of people stolen from kingdoms across West and Central Africa, where every street corner held the echo of a language the colonizers tried to erase. But there were places hidden, fragile, brave, where resistance quietly refused to die. Inside the convent lived Sister Magdalena, a woman the world would later call a saint, a traitor, a criminal, and a miracle all at once. To people outside the convent walls, she was simply a quiet nun in a gray habit, someone who walked slowly and prayed long, the kind of person you would never suspect of defying an empire. But to those who met her eyes, truly met them, she was something else entirely. Calm, unmovable, haunted by the feeling that faith meant nothing if it didn't protect the living. You see, Sister Magdalena had grown up hearing the soft sobs of enslaved families separated at the port. She had watched children dragged from their mothers by merchants who pretended it was business, not cruelty. She had listened to priests preach obedience while ignoring the chains clinking just outside the church gates. And the more she saw, the more one question rotted inside her. How can God live in a place built on so much human suffering? She wrestled with that question every night, kneeling before a crucifix that seemed to get heavier the longer she stared at it. The other nuns didn't understand her silence, but they also didn't follow her after midnight, into the darkest corridor of the convent, the one lined with cracked plaster and candle niches, because that was the place where she felt the walls, watching. One stormy night, everything changed. Lightning lit up the courtyard like a second of truth, and in that flash, Sister Magdalena saw movement behind the wooden lattice of the old pantry wall. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A face, eyes wide, terrified, desperate, human. A boy, no older than 13, skin soaked with rain, chest heaving, hands trembling so violently he could barely hold on to the small gap in the boards. Behind him, Sister Magdalena heard more breathing, more bodies press into a space far too small. She didn't scream. She didn't pray. She simply whispered, "Come out. You're safe now." But they couldn't come out. Not yet, because they were being hunted. And in that moment, as thunder growled above the convent like an angry god, Sister Magdalena realized the truth. The walls she thought she knew were already hiding fugitives. And they were begging her not for holiness, not for forgiveness, but for something far more dangerous. Before I continue, breathe with me for a second. Place yourself in that storm, in that corridor, in front of those terrified children. What would you have done? Would you risk your own life, your own soul for theirs? Because that is exactly what Sister Magdalena did. And it is where our story truly begins. Before we go any further, I want you to picture something with me, slowly, without rushing. Imagine walking through a place that claims to belong to God, knowing that every step you take to expose a secret that would get people killed. That was what Sister Magdalena lived with from the moment she saw those faces behind the pantry wall. Those children were not alone. Behind the crumbling plaster, hidden in a cavity no wider than a man's shoulders, were 7 fugitives, men, women, and 2 more children, all escaping from plantation near Cachoeira. They had been running for days, guided only by darkness and instinct. Hunters were behind them. Dogs too, the kind trained to tear flesh. They had reached the convent by sheer accident or maybe fate, depending on how you look at the world. A small crack in the outer wall had been widened by rain and time, and the oldest among them, a woman named Marcelina, had forced her body through it, telling the others to follow. They hadn't expected salvation inside, just a moment of breath. But what they found was something much stranger. A holy place that didn't feel holy, and a nun who didn't look away. When Sister Magdalena faced them in that narrow corridor, she didn't hesitate. She didn't ask their names. She didn't ask what they had done, because she already knew the answer. They had done the unforgivable crime of wanting to live free. She led them deeper into the convent, to a storeroom abandoned after termites had eaten the beams. While the other nuns slept, Magdalena lit a single candle and examined every inch of the room. The floorboards were loose. The wall facing the courtyard had hollow spots, places where the builders hadn't bothered to fill the gaps with stone. A plan began forming in her mind, something so insane she almost laughed at her own audacity. She didn't pray for guidance. She didn't ask heaven for permission. She simply moved forward, as if her soul already knew the price she was about to pay. For 3 nights, she returned to that storeroom with tools stolen from the gardeners. She worked in absolute silence, scraping, prying, widening the cavity behind the wall until it could hold the fugitives without suffocating them. Her hands bled, her shoulders ached, but something in her eyes sparked with a kind of defiance she had never felt before. Meanwhile, the fugitives hid in abandoned corners of the convent, behind linen barrels, under stairwells, between crates of dried cassava. Marcelina kept the children quiet with soft humming, songs of her homeland that Magdalena had never heard before, songs full of sorrow and pride, like a memory refusing to die. During the day, Magdalena acted as if nothing was happening. She swept the hallways. She prepared bread in the kitchen. She helped the elderly nuns with their knitting. But every sound made her flinch. Footsteps behind her, keys turning, a door creaking. Any noise could mean discovery, because by then, rumors were already creeping up the hill toward the convent. Hunters searching for runaways. Farmers whispering that escaped slaves had passed through the area. Militiamen demanding to inspect properties. The Mother Superior, an aging woman named Sister Amarani, hated conflict and believed that the best way to survive the times was to stay silent and untouched. She refused to involve the convent in matters of the outside world. If she discovered fugitives hidden inside her sacred walls, she would panic. She would hand them over instantly, and Sister Magdalena knew that. So she began doing something she never thought she would do in her entire life. She started lying to protect the fugitives. She lied about missing food, about strange noises, about why she was awake before dawn. She lied so smoothly that even the other nuns began to see her as someone more responsible, more dedicated. Her halo, ironically, began to shine brighter. Meanwhile, behind the storeroom wall, a small, secret world was forming. The fugitives slept sitting up, knees against their chests. Marcelina whispered prayers in Kimbundu. A young man named Elias kept watching cracks in the wall for any sign of danger. The youngest child, Tiago, traced shapes on the stone with his small fingers whenever fear tightened his throat. Sister Magdalena brought them food at night, cassava, dried fish, and cups of water she carried in her own sleeves. She taught them a quiet code of knocks, so they could warn each other if someone approached. And little by little, something unexpected grew between them, not the fragile kind, the kind that grows between people who have nothing left to lose. But danger was coming. One morning, the convent bell rang before sunrise, a rare event. Magdalena froze as soon as she heard the sharp tone. That bell wasn't for prayer. It was for intrusion. Soldiers were at the gates. A plantation owner had tipped them off, claiming the fugitives were hiding somewhere among the holy women. The accusation was absurd. Unless someone knew what Magdalena had been doing, the nuns were ordered to gather in the courtyard. The soldiers inspected every room, every kitchen cabinet, every corner of the garden. They stomped through the hallways, machetes tapping their belts, rifles slung over their shoulders. Magdalena stood perfectly still, hands clasped, pulse hammering in her throat. At one point, a soldier knocked on the very wall where the fugitives were hidden. A hollow sound answered. Sister Magdalena felt her blood freeze, her breath locked in her chest. The soldier frowned, raised his fist to knock again. But at that exact moment, a thunderclap exploded above the convent, loud, sudden, shaking the beams. The soldier jerked his hand, muttered about old buildings falling apart, and moved on. Inside the wall, Elias covered the children's mouths to keep them from gasping. The storm outside raged, and the convent held its breath. When the soldiers finally left, the Mother Superior scolded them for disturbing sacred ground. But Magdalena knew this was just the beginning. If the fugitives stayed, they would be found. If they fled, they would be hunted and killed. And then came the night that sealed their fate, and hers. A knock at her cell door. Soft, trembling. It was Marcelina. "We cannot stay hidden forever," the woman whispered. "Walls keep us alive, but they also bury us." She was right, and what Sister Magdalena chose next would transform her from a quiet nun into the center of one of the most dangerous secrets in Bahian history. A secret that would eventually make the walls of the convent famous. Not for holiness, but for the lives they tried to swallow. Before we walk into what happened next, I want you to imagine a feeling, not a place, not a person. A feeling, that moment when you know something is about to break. You can't explain it logically. You just feel the air tighten around you, the way animals sense a storm hours before it arrives. That was the atmosphere inside the Convento de Santa Luzia in the days after the soldiers' visit. No one spoke about it, but everyone, even the nuns who had no idea what was hidden, felt something twisting in the silence. Sister Magdalena barely slept. Every creak in the hallway, every call from another cell, every gust of wind scraping branches against the windows made her heart pound. She lived in a state of constant alertness, her body present in the convent, but her mind trapped behind the wall with the fugitives. Meanwhile, the fugitives themselves were reaching their limit. The space was too small, the air was too thin, the fear was too heavy. The youngest child, Tiago, began to cry in silence, covering his face with his hands so no one would hear him. Marcelina comforted him with stories of Quilombos, free communities hidden in forests and mountains, places where no overseer could ever step foot. Elias, the one who kept watch, had developed a cough from the cold stone pressing against his back at night. Every time he coughed, he bit his own knuckles to muffle the sound. And Sister Magdalena watched them all with a torment she could no longer hold inside. She needed a plan, a real one, not just survival, escape. And escape required something no nun was supposed to do, defy the convent itself. On the 5th night after the soldiers' search, Magdalena made a decision that would redefine everything she thought she knew about faith. She approached the fugitives' hiding place when the moon was barely a sliver. Her lantern flickered as she stepped inside the storeroom, bracing herself against the cold air that seeped through the walls. When she gently knocked the agreed signal, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, she heard movement inside. Then the wall panel shifted just enough for her to see Marcelina's eyes, dark and exhausted. "We can't stay," Magdalena whispered. "They'll come back with dogs next time." Marcelina nodded slowly. "The forest," she whispered back. "If we reach the forest, we can follow the river." But the forest lay miles away, and between the convent and the trees stretched open fields patrolled by armed men. It was madness, but staying was a slower death. For hours, the 2 women plotted. They mapped a silent route to the convent's laundry yard, past the chicken coops, down an old path once used by novices sneaking to the river to wash clothes during drought. From there, they could slip into mangroves and then into dense bushland. It would require perfect timing. No noise, no hesitation, no fear. But fate rarely respects the plans of the desperate, because someone inside the convent had been watching. Her name was Sister Beatrice, a young novice, barely 17, with eyes that absorbed everything and said nothing. She admired Magdalena deeply, but she also feared her. Something about the older nun's silence, her intensity, her midnight wanderings had begun to disturb her. And that night, unable to sleep, Beatrice wandered the halls and saw something she was never meant to see. Sister Magdalena gently knocking on a wall, and the wall responding. She stood frozen, her breast shallow, her mind unable to make sense of the impossible image. A nun knocking, a wall answering, faces appearing where there should be only stone. Beatrice didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply backed away slowly, trembling, until her shoulder hit the hallway pillar. Her heart raced as she returned to her tiny cell and curled into her blanket, trying to convince herself she had imagined it. But what she had seen would grow inside her like a fever. Meanwhile, Sister Magdalena continued preparing to escape for the fugitives. She stole bread, water, a small knife, and dried herbs for Elias's cough. She wrapped everything in sacks made from old altar cloths. She waited for the darkest hour, that silent window between midnight and dawn when the world feels suspended, when even the roosters hold their breath. But just as she was about to signal to Marcelina that it was time to leave, chaos erupted in the convent. A scream, high-pitched, terrified, it came from the courtyard. Then another voice, the Mother Superior's, shouting orders. Candles lit everywhere, feet rushing across stone, keys rattling, something heavy being dragged. Sister Magdalena's stomach dropped. The scream had come from Sister Beatrice, and the words she had shouted as she ran into the courtyard echoed in Magdalena's skull like a curse. Ghosts! There are ghosts inside the walls. Not fugitives, not people. Ghosts! But it didn't matter, because the moment that word left Beatrice's mouth, the convent was no longer shelter, it was a trap. The nuns gathered in a circle, their fear turning into superstition. The Mother Superior demanded lanterns. Someone whispered about demons. Another talked about exorcisms. And then one of the older nuns, someone who had survived a slave rebellion decades earlier, muttered, "Ghosts don't hide in walls. People do." Silence fell. The Mother Superior's eyes shifted. Slow, cold, calculating. "Search the convent," she ordered. The world collapsed around Sister Magdalena. She ran, not through hallways, but through choices she no longer had. Every second she wasted meant soldiers might be summoned. Dogs, chains, punishment, death. She sprinted to the storeroom and tapped the wall sharply, urgently. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again, the signal for danger. Marcelina's face appeared instantly. "They know," Magdalena whispered. "You must leave now." "But the courtyard." "I'll create a distraction." "Go." Elias grabbed the children. Marcelina reached for Magdalena's hand and held it tightly for a heartbeat, a silent thank you, a goodbye, a prayer. Then they slipped into the darkness, moving toward the back door. Their bodies pressed low to the ground, and Sister Magdalena did something unthinkable. She ran straight into the courtyard, into the circle of nuns, and shouted, "There is nothing in these walls except the stories you fear to face." It worked. For a moment, every head turned toward her, startled, confused, offended, and in that sharp, suspended silence, the fugitives slipped through the yard, past the pantry, past the chicken coop, disappearing into the night. But it came at a cost, because in that same moment, the Mother Superior looked at Sister Magdalena with eyes that held sudden, devastating clarity. "You know something," she whispered, "and the walls of the convent, the same walls that had protected lives, were finally ready to betray her. I want you to take a breath with me before we step into this final part. A slow breath, not to calm down, but to make space inside you for what comes next. Because endings like this, they don't land softly." When the fugitives escaped into the night, weaving through shadows and slipping into the mangroves beyond the convent walls, a brief, fragile hope took shape. Maybe they were safe. Maybe the river would hide them. Maybe the forest would embrace them like a mother reclaiming her children. But inside the convent, hope wasn't what filled the air. Suspicion did. The Mother Superior stood in the courtyard, her rosary shaking in her hand, her face pale with dread and fury. She was an evil woman, but she was a woman shaped by fear. Fear of the crown, fear of the church, fear of losing control, fear of anything that broke the rigid order she believed kept the world from collapsing. And Sister Magdalena was now the embodiment of everything she feared. "Bring her to me," Mother Amirani ordered. 2 nuns escorted Magdalena, not roughly, but with a stiff distance reserved for someone who has crossed a sacred line. They didn't touch her skin. They held her by her sleeves, as if she were contaminated by something dangerous. In a way, she was contaminated by truth. They brought her into the refectory, the place where the nuns ate in silence beneath a painting of Christ whose eyes always seemed to follow you. Candles lit the room unevenly, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Mother Amirani sat at the long wooden table, her hands clasped tightly. "Tell me," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "What exactly have you done?" Magdalena could have lied. She could have hidden behind obedience. She could have said she saw nothing, knew nothing, heard nothing. But lies had already cost too many lives in Brazil. So she lifted her chin and answered, "I sheltered people who were hunted. That is all." The room froze. One of the older nuns gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Another whispered a prayer. Sister Beatrice, the girl whose scream had triggered everything, stared at the floor, tears filling her eyes. Mother Amirani leaned forward slowly. "You betrayed your vows," she whispered. "No," Magdalena replied softly. "I fulfilled them. What you did could bring soldiers back here. Punishment, confiscation. This convent could be shut down," the Mother Superior hissed. "Do you understand the danger you brought upon us?" Magdalena held her gaze. "The danger was already here," she said. "It was in the chains. It was in the silence. It was in our refusal to see suffering as our problem." Her voice didn't rise, but her words landed like stones thrown into deep water. "You risked the lives of every woman here," the Mother Superior insisted. "And they risk theirs every day just by existing," Magdalena answered. "I will not apologize for choosing life." Mother Amirani slammed her palm on the table. "You protected criminals." Magdalena shook her head. "I protected human beings." The debate no longer sounded like a conversation. It sounded like a trial, and that's exactly what it became. At dawn, Mother Amirani gathered all the nuns in the chapel. The air was heavy with humidity and dread. Outside, the sky glowed with the faintest red, the kind of sunrise that looks more like a warning than a blessing. Magdalena stood alone at the front, facing dozens of faces she prayed beside for years. Some were sympathetic, others were horrified. Most simply didn't know what to feel. Mother Amirani spoke as if delivering a sermon. Sister Magdalena has confessed to harboring fugitives. She admits to hiding them within these walls. She has deceived us. She has endangered us. And she has shamed this house of God. Then she turned to Magdalena. "You may speak." Magdalena stepped forward. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't falter. She looked at her sisters, all of them, and spoke not to justify herself, but to remind them of something they had forgotten. "Faith," she said, "has no meaning if it ignores the suffering right outside its doors." A murmur spread through the chapel. "I did not betray God," she continued. "I betrayed fear, and I would do it again." The silence that followed was the kind that feels alive, thick, trembling, waiting. Then Mother Amirani delivered her verdict. "You are forbidden from speaking to anyone outside the convent. You will be confined to the silent wing, and you will perform penance for 1 year." She paused. Her voice softened, but not out of compassion, out of dread. "And if the authorities come, you will bear this burden alone." In other words, if soldiers returned, Magdalena would be handed over. And they did return. 2 weeks later, the plantation owner arrived with armed men. He demanded to search the convent again. He claimed fugitives had been seen, heading toward the forest. He accused the nuns of hiding rebellious property. Mother Amirani greeted them with rigid politeness. "There is no one here," she insisted. But one of the soldiers stepped forward. "We have witnesses who saw movement at night." The Mother Superior's hands shook. She didn't show them to the man, but she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. And that was all he needed. "Bring all the sisters to the courtyard," he demanded. "We will question each one." The nuns obeyed. They lined up. Magdalena stood at the end of the row. The soldier approached her first. "You," he said, "your face looks nervous." Magdalena stared at him without flinching. "I am at peace," she replied. He smirked. "Then you won't mind answering questions." He interrogated her relentlessly, where she had been the night of the storm, whether she had seen anything unusual, why there were footprints near the back wall, why bread had gone missing. Every question was a blade aimed at her heart, but she refused a break. "People passed near the convent," she finally said, "but they did not stay." The soldier studied her. Something in her calmness unsettled him. He wanted to push harder, but the sun was rising, the heat was growing, and the plantation owner was growing impatient. "Fine," he growled. "If we find them, we'll know who helped them." He left without proof, without bodies, without satisfaction. And Sister Magdalena? She walked back into the convent in silence, knowing her life had changed forever. Months passed. Word slowly spread across Bahia of a group of fugitives who had escaped soldiers, crossed rivers, and disappeared into the hills. Some said they joined a Colombo deep in the forest. Others said they reached a hidden fishing village and left by boat under the moon. Their fate became legend. But inside the convent, Sister Magdalena became legend too. Not through praise, but through fear, awe, and whisper respect. Some called her reckless. Others called her holy. Many avoided her entirely, unsure whether she was a warning or a miracle. But one thing became impossible to deny. She had changed the air inside those walls forever. No one could look at the storeroom the same way. No one could pray without remembering the faces that had hidden in the darkness. No one could walk past Magdalena without feeling the weight of a question she had forced into their hearts. Years later, long after abolition, long after the convent had aged and cracked and been rebuilt, a mason repairing the old storeroom uncovered something unexpected. Faint carvings on the inside stone, names, symbols, and a single word etched in shaky letters. Freedom. It was proof of what lived, breathed, and fought behind those walls. Proof that the story wasn't just rumor. It was real. And Sister Magdalena's legacy, once hidden like the fugitives she protected, finally came to the surface. Before we end, I want to tell you one last thing. Something quiet but important. History doesn't remember the loudest people. It remembers the ones who act when everyone else stays silent. And sometimes those people wear veils, carry rosaries, and stand alone between violence and the innocent in a world built on walls. She chose to become